Brother blocked my brave nephew from conquering stage fright at church, despite permission from the supportive youth pastor. That happened at church and is about my 12-year-old nephew and a situation he told me about over the phone. Every few months, his church has something called a Youth Sunday where the youth pastor gives the sermon to the adults, and the youth band do the worship to give the regular worship team a break. The youth also do the church announcements and pass tithe baskets, and someone usually sings a song as the baskets are passed. That person was going to be my nephew, on 6/15, who was going to play a worship song on piano, and this would also be his first time playing an adult service. He is not a part of the youth band, but he's taken piano lessons for a few years. He's played in recitals, but never for as many people as their church, who has 2 services with over 1,000 capacity. But when was about to play, he got nervous and started crying on the piano bench. One of the youth leaders went over to try and comfort him, but he couldn't muster the energy to try after crying/feeling embarrassed. The church was supportive and even gave him a standing ovation as the leader led him off stage, and my 12-year-old nephew called me last week to vent about the aftermath during the week. He was angry and motivated to try again when the next Youth Sunday happened, and he even gained permission from the youth pastor to play the same song next time too. But the reason he called was because his dad said no after he relayed what the youth pastor said, and it's caused arguments between his parents because his mother thinks he should play. He said he and his mother were trying to convince him, but that he wasn't budging. And while I'm not a Christian anymore, I was raised religious, I can see the potential of an unspoken testimony when a kid overcomes his fears while potentially inspiring others, and I couldn't understand why my brother wouldn't support it. I decided to call him to understand his reasoning, and he explained he said no because it wouldn't be about God anymore. He said that his redemption should be somewhere else, like a recital that's not connected to the church. But when I tried to explain how he should be proud of his kid's motivation, he reiterated that church wasn't the place. But when I argued that the point of church was literally redemption, I also told him that others could be inspired by his son's perseverance. But he said I didn't understand and that it was none of my business. I also told him how crazy it was that I had to try and convince him to support his son, but he wouldn't budge. I agree it's none of my business. But I can't understand not wanting to support your son over some self-imposed nonsense when the youth pastor supports it too. I spoke with my nephew again following the conversation, and he told me that his dad said he would inform the youth pastor about his decision too. Update 1. I was emotional when my nephew called. He reached out to me because he couldn't get through to his parents, and I felt obliged to at least call my brother. But when people said that I was wrong to do so because it was none of my business, I was reminded of how I pushed past that thought to overstep due to my emotions. For that reason, I decided to call my brother back to apologize for telling him how to handle his family. He didn't ask for my opinion, and that was wrong of me. But when we spoke again, his tune changed from the first time when he opened up to me a little more after I apologized for trying to insert myself into his business. He said he appreciated it and that he thought about our conversation and wanted to clarify a few things. He said he understood my urge to call him in hindsight. His son called me about a situation that wasn't my business. So in doing so, he said he made it my business. And for that reason, he wanted to clarify. He said he spoke to his son about talking to others when mom and dad say no, something he said all parents consider disrespectful. Going to someone else after a parent makes a decision, like asking mom for ice cream after dad said no. He also explained why he planned to say no to the youth pastor's offer to have him try again because he needed to learn that you won't always get a second chance in life. But when I suggested that church could be the perfect place for a second chance, I tried to explain how church was supposed to be a family, and families want each other to succeed. The Bible literally states to build each other up in Christ, 1 Thessalonians 5:11, and what better place to allow God to use his son's perseverance as a testimony to inspire others. Years ago, there was a Christian movie from the VeggieTales series about Jonah and how God gives second chances, and I told him that that was all his son was asking for. But he reiterated how church wasn't the place because church is supposed to be about God. But when I asked why the youth pastor gave him permission if it wasn't in God's will, he said the standing ovation his son received out of support made him upset, something he didn't say during our first call when I asked why. He said his son didn't deserve the standing ovation because he didn't play, and he compared it to a participation trophy. He also said it was embarrassing because a few people came over after church service to encourage his son and tell him to try again next time. I tried to reason that they gave him the standing ovation because they wanted to encourage a young person in the congregation, but he said he wouldn't learn if there weren't consequences. And being told a few days later at youth group that he could try again wasn't how life usually works. So he said he was going to talk to the youth pastor, and that was pretty much it. I told him that I respectfully disagreed with his position, but that I wouldn't call him about it again because it was none of my business technically. What I did suggest was getting another opinion from someone in the church before talking to the youth pastor, but he said that there was no need. He thanked me for calling him, and that was pretty much it. As much of a missed opportunity it seems, there's really nothing I can nor should do. I hope other opportunities present itself for my nephew, and I found it interesting how I'm tried to use Christian jargon to convince my brother despite walking away years ago. The other reason I felt compelled about it was because of a coworker who has a son he often vents about. The son graduated high school with honors, and he attended community college with plans to transfer to a university afterward. He was also on the honor program in college too, but has dropped out of the community college for a plethora of reasons including addiction. It's approaching 2 years since he's been to class, and he lives with his parents while refusing to find work or pay rent. Parents are split on evicting him. I think it's unfortunate when he seemed to be rather smart, so when I see someone like my nephew call me because he feels bad about getting too scared, I believe his motivation to try again should be rewarded. But in preventing him from doing so, you could rob a lifelong memory of getting back up that he can remember/refer to years from now when life throws a different challenge at him, and I hope it doesn't stunt his growth/confidence. My coworker's son was career-driven not too long ago, so you shouldn't take it for granted when your kid is motivated. I wish I would have thought to mention my coworker's son to my brother, but perhaps it wouldn't have changed his mind. Update 2. The first is that my nephew informed me over the phone that my brother spoke to the youth pastor and requested he'd be removed from July's Youth Sunday lineup, where he would have performed the same song while the tithe baskets were being passed. My brother told the youth pastor that God told him that he wasn't ready, and my brother relayed that to my nephew too. He also said that he needed more time to not rush back into it according to my nephew. The youth pastor complied and removed my nephew from the July lineup, although he said he could try again during August Youth Sunday if that was better. I tried to encourage my nephew when he called, but I want to explain something before going into detail. I received a lot of DMs stating that the people who commented on my original post were wrong to tell me that my nephew was none of my business. A parent even said that they hoped extended family would hold them accountable if they were screwing up. In hindsight, I was wrong about a few things. Yes, my brother's family is his personal business. But when a child reaches out for help regarding something that isn't inherently wrong, you have the responsibility as an adult to tell him to listen to his parents, if what they're saying is correct, or reach out to hear the parent's side if not, so long as it isn't a confidential abusive situation. In my nephew's case, I can't see the downside of the church's encouragement along with a chance for a lifelong memory of redemption. The youth pastor even approved the opportunity to try again, but my brother spun some nonsense about God to change his mind, as an excuse for his insecurity. I find it hypocritical when my brother's embarrassment overrode the youth pastor's decision to let him try again. Does the youth pastor not hear from God too? Or only when my brother deems it convenient? The other reflection I had was this. By denying my nephew the opportunity to try again, he is undermining the very basis of Christianity when he said he needed to learn that you don't always get second chances. If humanity didn't get a second chance after eating from the tree of good and evil in Genesis, we all would have been destined to hell according to Christianity, for the first sin ever recorded. The only reason humanity wasn't was because God sent Jesus into the world to give people a second chance by dying on the cross for their sins. So by denying his son a second chance, in the house of God no less, he is undermining the very basis of Christianity, and especially when a youth pastor approves it. Regarding the call I had with my nephew, he's had a change of heart since our first call. When he asked my brother if he could play in August Youth Sunday, my brother told him no, and when he asked how long, my brother told him until he said otherwise. So for that reason, along with arguments in their home, my nephew doesn't want to play piano in church anymore. And when he told my brother, he agreed and said that the focus should be on God in church and nothing else. My nephew also said he was tired of the yelling that happened during their arguments and having to wait for invisible deadlines from his dad. And given all the BS he's had to go through, I don't blame him for no longer wanting to play there with a dad who constantly moves goalposts. Even his mother, who was originally open to trying again, has come around to his father's side. When I spoke to my nephew, I tried to encourage him to bring that same motivation to other areas of his life, including the next time he gets to play at a recital. I told him I'll try to attend the next one. I also reinforced that he did nothing wrong. Adults get stage fright too, but strength is how you get back up. I even gave a sports analogy about how many players are sometimes denied of second chances, only to prove those deniers wrong elsewhere. Peyton Manning wasn't given a chance to come back from the neck injury with the Colts and was released, only to join the Broncos and win a Super Bowl following some MVP-level seasons in Denver. I also promised to do something fun the next time I see him, like ice cream or a movie if he wants. I only see his family for the holidays due to distance, but I'm considering taking time off to see him sooner to cheer him up. He could use a distraction in the best way, and I even considered purchasing the new Nintendo device, although they're out of stock at many places I've checked. I would appreciate other ideas that could hopefully cheer him up. Regarding my brother, I debated calling him because I felt I had to say something, and let him off easy when I apologized for reaching out on my nephew's behalf after heeding bad advice. However, I chose an email because it's easier to organize thoughts on paper. I started by telling him that while it wasn't my place to tell him how to parent his family, I wanted to provide my opinion one last time regarding this situation. In a much softer way than I spoke about my brother in this post, I tried to remind him of how God sent Jesus to give humanity a second chance like I said above, and I did so without accusing him of depriving his son, because I want him to consider it. I also encouraged him to speak to someone else at church for a second godly opinion, because the church seems supportive of his son. And even if he wouldn't play in July, I encouraged him to let him try again in August so that he wouldn't build resentment towards the church or his family. If my nephew chooses to walk away from Christianity, he would be validated in doing so for any reason. But it would be a shame if it happened over something as frail as his father's ego, so I'm hoping for the best. He hasn't replied yet, and it's been a few days since I've sent it. I wanted to be harsher than I was because people like him give Christians a bad name, using God as an excuse for their insecurities and hurtful behavior. But using that tone would have been an immediate turn off, so I opted for a softer one. Update 3. My brother finally responded to the email I sent him, and he did so via text. He said he was disappointed that I went back on my word to bring up the matter after believing our previous call would be the last. He also said I had no right to use the Bible to try and convince him because I wasn't a practicing Christian. He then said that he didn't tell me how to live and that he didn't want me to bring it up again. I have yet to respond to him, but I did have another conversation with my nephew about a recent decision he made. He told me that he had decided to stop playing piano altogether for a few more reasons I hadn't known. He previously mentioned that there was often yelling when he asked his dad if he could try again. But what I didn't know was that he was punished for asking the youth pastor if he could try again after my brother said no earlier in the week. And when he told my brother that the youth pastor said yes, he was punished. My brother took away his video game device for a few days before returning it. So that played a part in him losing the desire to practice for much of last month, and he has now decided to quit piano entirely. When he told my brother, he agreed with his decision, although his mom disagreed. My nephew said he was embarrassed after my brother went to the youth pastor and told him that his son disobeyed by asking the youth pastor to try again after he said no, and it played a part in the youth pastor's decision to remove him from the lineup. So, while my nephew didn't give me the whole story about how he had already been told no by my brother before asking the youth pastor, my position still stands that my brother is wrong. My nephew should be commended for wanting to try again, but he was punished and lost his passion instead. I can't blame my nephew for not wanting to continue in such a spiteful environment at home. My brother even said that he should take a break from his piano lessons, according to my nephew, and I wasn't aware of that until our last call. My nephew told my brother that he didn't want to attend youth group anymore following the embarrassment of what happened, and my brother agreed. My brother not only told him that he didn't need to attend that youth group anymore, but also that he didn't have to attend that church on Sundays. He said they would look for a new youth group in the community so that he could have a fresh start. He also said that would help kill the noise at church about when he tried to play again. My brother has switched churches a few times over the years. But I find it sad that my nephew lost a non-toxic, supportive church community, which seems to be all too rare these days. By giving my nephew the standing ovation after his shortcomings, they showed the love of Jesus, and that shouldn't be taken for granted. It wouldn't surprise me if my brother left eventually. He teaches a lot there, so I'm guessing he has commitments to see through. But I would bet money that he does sooner or later. I tried to encourage my nephew not to let them taint his passion for piano, but he had already decided when we spoke. I already made plans to take time off to visit him on Labor Day weekend, and I hope to encourage him in person because he needs it. He said he wants to move on from it all, and I can't blame him. I debated telling others in our family about the shameful way he destroyed his son's hobby, but I haven't because he wants to move on, and that could make things worse for him at home if they think he told others. Instead, I'm looking into getting counseling from a professional to see how I can better support him going forward. That likely won't happen before I visit, but I want to be able to help him long term because there will likely be other issues with his parents. I already lost respect for my brother's politics in recent years, that he'd often bring up in calls despite me saying I don't want to hear it, but no only matters when he says it regarding the piano incident, but this has somehow made me lose even more. He's dead to me for how he's treated his son, but I'm holding back my desire to yell at him to ensure I'm not cut off from my nephew who feels comfortable venting. Update 4. Gonna keep this brief as my only update came via a text. When I drive to visit my brother for the holidays or during the year, I give him a heads up about the weekend I'm thinking of, and we've done that for years. It also helps us schedule activities too, and my brother was cool when I initially told him that I could visit for Labor Day weekend. I texted him a few days ago about it, and he replied that it was fine. But now, he's changed his mind and sent a new text apologizing for the last-minute change. He said he doesn't think it's a good time for me to visit given what happened with the church situation. But if I choose to come anyway, we wouldn't hang out, and I couldn't stay with them. To save money in years past, they would allow me to stay in their family room on one of the couches that turns into a bed, but that is now off of the table for Labor Day weekend. This is the first time he told me I couldn't come. And when I called to hear him explain over the phone, he said he didn't want me to talk to my nephew over the phone for the time being, and he also told my nephew not to call me either. I told him that I didn't think that was right, but he said he'd know if I called my nephew, and I'm aware that my nephew has parental controls on his phone. So from this point on, I'm not going to communicate further with them until I speak with a counselor to see how I can best help my nephew now and in the future. I'm worried that there's more going on that I don't know, given the yelling among other things my nephew mentioned regarding the incident, but I'm going to get counseling from a professional first because, at this rate, I feel like things are hanging by a thread. So I'll get advice before making a mistake and getting cut off entirely when my nephew might need me in the future. I have booked an appointment with my doctor to see if he can refer me to a therapist faster while searching for some online in the meantime. Update 5. Labor Day has come and gone. I didn't visit my brother per his 180, and I didn't respond to his 180 text either. When I didn't respond for a few days, he actually had the nerve to call me and apologize for the last-minute change. When he asked why I didn't respond, I voiced my displeasure with his 180, and how he told me not to contact my nephew. Regarding the latter, he said he blocked my number on my nephew's phone using parental controls because he wanted to de-escalate the situation, and that led to another argument. He said it'd be temporary, but who knows with him. I previously mentioned booking an appointment with my doctor to see if he could refer me to a therapist. But since his earliest appointment was a few months out, I decided to use my job's employee resources, which offered free counseling for employees much sooner. I explained my nephew's situation. How he reached out for help and mentioned that other issues were going on at home, but didn't want to specify, when I asked if anything else had happened besides the yelling. My counselor said that they were trying to isolate him because why would they pull him from a supportive church and tell me not to contact him too? She recommended telling my parents and potentially others because it'd be hard for them to cut off everyone, so that's what I decided to do. I called my parents, who are both Christians, and told them everything that happened to my nephew, and they were disgusted and unaware of the situation. They attend a different church than my brother. They called my brother shortly after our conversation, and my brother later texted me that I had no place to tell them about his family business. I decided to call him rather than argue over text, and we had a brief conversation. He said the situation was already over because his wife and son had already begun attending another church, and that he'd joined them after finishing some commitment since he still teaches at his church. He also said that I was no longer invited to come over for Thanksgiving and Christmas for the foreseeable future until things die down. I called my parents shortly after our call ended, and they were disgusted with what he said. My parents have since debated two courses of action. The first is to call for a wellness check for my nephew, or CPS. They're researching which would be better for this situation, and the second they already did. They reached out to a pastor at their church and told him the full situation with my nephew. The pastor said that he would see if he, or another pastor, would be allowed to call the pastor at my brother's church to inform them of the real reason my brother wouldn't let his son try again, and lied to the youth pastor by saying God told him his son wasn't ready instead of mentioning his embarrassment and other reasons he gave. I support both options, and we will do both, but I especially love the second one and credit my parents and that pastor for coming up with it. According to that pastor, he said that churches sometimes call other churches when they hear of certain situations or to report a harmful member they've had experience with, so he thinks that this could fall into that category. Update 6. I ended up finding out more in a week than I have in months, and none of it came from my brother. My parents followed through on what they said they would do and called in a wellness check. 2 officers did show up at their house one evening, and I only know the details because my mom called me after my dad hung up with my sister-in-law. Apparently, it was right after dinner. The officers asked to speak to my nephew alone and then came back and spoke to both parents. Nothing dramatic happened, no one was dragged out of the house, and there weren't raised voices, but the officers told my parents afterward that they'd be forwarding a referral to a family services unit because of the report of yelling, sudden church change, isolation from extended family, and the punishment tied to talking to a trusted adult. My brother found out within an hour that it was my parents who made the call, and he called my mom twice. She didn't answer the first time because she said she didn't trust herself to stay calm. She answered the second time and told him that if he keeps cutting people out, somebody has to keep eyes on the situation because kids don't get to pick their adults. He told her she was undermining headship and hung up. I'm sure he's furious with me too, but he hasn't reached out. I guess I'm in the blast radius in silence. The other piece moved faster than I expected. The pastor at my parents' church did reach out to my brother's leadership, and the call got escalated to their senior pastor. I'm not a member there and have no standing, so I expected it to get brushed off, but my parents' pastor told me, after his own follow-up, that the senior pastor was concerned that a leader at his church used God told me as the stated reason to block an opportunity for a kid when the youth pastor had already affirmed it. They set a meeting with my brother and the youth pastor to clarify who said what and why the story changed. I wasn't in the room obviously, but I have a fairly clear picture of how it went because the youth pastor called my dad. He said the meeting was heavy and sad. My brother defended his choice as protecting God's glory and said he didn't want worship to turn into therapy time. The youth pastor told the senior pastor he'd given permission because he believed it would build the congregation, not distract it, and that he'd seen the boy's heart and thought it was a good story in the making. The senior pastor then asked my brother flat out if there was anything else driving the decision: embarrassment over the ovation, being approached after service, the optics, and my brother got quiet and said, "It's not about optics, I just won't have it." From there, the senior pastor asked him to take a season of rest from teaching while they care for the whole family, and my brother said he was resigning his roles effective immediately and would be attending elsewhere, so he left sooner than expected, not in a blaze of repentance, not scorched earth with a confession, just a quick exit couched in righteous language. The youth pastor sounded grief-struck on the phone with my dad. He asked my dad to tell my nephew that none of this was his fault and that he's always welcome to come back if he wants. My dad said he would, but he doesn't know if he'll get the chance. I haven't broken contact rules or tried to sneak a call. I'm working with my counselor and doing what she told me, which was to be the consistent, non-reactive adult who stays available without escalating. But a note still made it through. I got a handwritten letter from my nephew in the mail with no return address, just my name and city, and inside it said, "Hi. Grandma gave me the stamp. Dad says not to talk to you, but I wanted to say hi." My friend let me play his keyboard and I remembered the ending of my song and it wasn't scary. It sounded different, like in my head it was louder but it wasn't. I think that's weird. I'm on the B team for soccer. I got 2 blisters. Please don't be mad at Dad because it makes him yell more. I'm okay. I had a cookie. Bye. It was written in pencil with drawings along the margins, 3 tiny soccer balls and what I think was a rectangle piano. I sat in my car and read it twice because I didn't trust myself to bring my face inside my house yet. I texted my mom to ask if she helped him, and she said she bought stamps for school mailers and left them on her table, then drove him to practice. I told her thank you. She said it's not sneaking if a kid writes his uncle a letter. My parents did manage a lunch with my sister-in-law this weekend while my brother was at a men's retreat with the new church. They met at a chain diner and my nephew came along. My mom said he looked smaller somehow, which I think is what grandparents say when they're trying not to use the word sad. He ordered pancakes and picked at them, then perked up when my dad asked about soccer. He told them the coach said he's a good defender and that he likes planning where to stand. When my mom asked if he'd like to come over next weekend to bake, he looked at his mom, and she told him it's okay if he wants. He said yes. On the way to their car, my mom handed my sister-in-law a little envelope with a gift card for groceries for the team snacks, and she didn't refuse it. She also told my parents that the officers were polite and that it made my brother tight, which is her word for wound up. She said the social worker called and said they'd be doing a home visit in a couple of weeks and that they want to talk to my nephew's homeroom teacher too. She asked my parents if they thought they did the right thing. My dad told her yes because attention isn't punishment when a kid is in the middle of adult choices, then he apologized if it made her week harder. She cried into a napkin for a minute and then changed the subject to school supplies. As for my brother, he sent a mass text to a handful of family members last night about a season of transition and said he was stepping away from teaching to focus on family discipleship. He said they'd found a healthier youth environment and that they'd appreciate privacy. He did not mention me, or my parents, or the wellness check, or the meeting with his pastor. But I got a separate voicemail later where he told me that dragging unbelieving family into spiritual matters is inviting attack, and that if I truly loved my nephew I would stop feeding narratives. I didn't respond. I'm not playing telephone war with a man who measures love by compliance. On my end, I asked my counselor what I can do that isn't reactive but is still real, and she gave me the okay to mail 1 card a month to my nephew with mundane, non-inflammatory content so he has a thread that isn't electric. So I wrote one about a duck that lives near my office pond who chases delivery trucks and how I named him Kevin even though he might be a she. I told him that blisters turn into tougher skin and that defenders make everyone else braver. I didn't say a word about pianos or churches or dads or God. I put 2 stickers in the envelope because he likes stickers on his water bottle. I mailed it today. Thanksgiving is already splintered. My parents told my brother they're hosting and that everyone is invited. He told them they wouldn't be coming for a time. My dad said okay and meant it. No begging, no bargaining, just a clear, open door. My parents asked my sister-in-law if she'd like to bring my nephew anyway and told her they'd drive her home if she needed. She said she'd let them know. If she shows up, my dad said we'll set up an extra folding table in the den with a puzzle and the TV on mute so it feels like a cousin's house and not a negotiation. If she doesn't, we'll leave the porch light on anyway. I don't know where this lands. I'm watching a kid who learned that recovery was off limits in one building slowly rebuild in other spaces that have nothing to prove. He's planning where to stand on a soccer field and noticing how loud a song is in his head compared to his hands, and honestly, that sounds like music education to me even if the keyboard belongs to a friend and the sanctuary is a bedroom. I'm still angry at my brother. I won't pretend otherwise, but the circle around my nephew quietly grew this week, and even if he can't see all of it yet, he found a corner of it, an envelope with a stamp, a pancake lunch, a coach who thinks about positions, a duck named Kevin, and I'm going to keep weaving what I can reach until the rest of it holds.